And we are recording. Jamey Haddad.
What's happening then?
It's good to have you on this thing, man. All right.
Where are you
So
at?
I'm
Chicago?
I'm in Chicago right now. Yeah. So I've had all sorts of musicians that I admire through, on this thing, and I got to tell you, like, the way that, like, I got hip to you, and the stuff that you made me hip to opened up an entire world for me, because in the Berkeley days you really introduced me to the whole soukatu thing and the takadimi world, and that opened up the world of rhythm. And then later on, when we were making the Marbin albums, it was just like really starting to think about color in music and bringing on that kind of thing to record. So I want to just pick your brain a little bit, kind of from the get-go. Like, how'd you get, like, your start playing?
Well, I'm my family's Christian Lebanese, and we were in Cleveland, Ohio. It's a very tight community, and my parents were already third generation though, but they really through the churches they associated with just mainly socialized with Lebanese people, and we would attend picnics on Sunday after church when the weather was nice. And I remember the first time that I saw, because when you're a kid, you really don't know how deep your dad is off into some trip or with his buddies. And when I saw them like playing music together, and my dad played a little percussion, and he actually played maracas pretty well. He played the Arabic drum somewhat, but it didn't take a whole lot for how that scene is. It didn't take a whole lot for people to get the spirit and to move, dance and sing. And when you're a kid, 4 years old, you're like, that's
I want some of that.
I got to have some of that. I mean, that's like the only game in town. And as it turned out, I was like I was very dyslexic and I stuttered a lot as a kid. But I, from the first time I played, my dad got me a Dlabucky, an Arabic, goblet drum, shaped drum, and my grandfather got me for my birthday. My dad got me that in July, and then on Christmas, my grandfather, when I was 5, got me a drum set, and then I took lessons from a guy who used to play drums and mallets for Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis. And he was, came back to Cleveland where I lived he opened a music store. And the guy was awesome. His name was Howard Brush, and he was a real gentleman. And he saw me struggling with the whole thing, like reading and stuff. But he dug me, and he thought I could play. So he would just say, "Hey, you want to play a tune?" I'm like, "I guess." I'm like 5 years old, I mean, but so he would play mallets and play tunes, and I became like a tuneaholic just because he was so cool, and he just let me show me a couple beats, and it was just kind of natural to proceed along those lines, and one thing leads to another, and I'm you always and after a certain point, I mean, I really wasn't playing Arabic music. I was playing rock and roll, the Beatles out and all that kind of stuff. And then with my sister, my dad had a bar exclusively it was kind of like 100%, black clientele in Cleveland. And so I worked there after high school. I went to Catholic all boys high school in the inner city as well. And when I would finish, I'd go down there a lot of times and wash dishes or do whatever I had to do. And it was a groovy scene. I mean, every tune in the jukebox. I mean, in the jukebox was Miles Davis and Cannonball Adderley and Ray Charles.
Nice.
Ray Charles was every other tune in the jukebox. And all the Motown tunes, all the Stax, and James Brown and the Philly sound, all that stuff. So we got all those. As it turns out, my guy went to grade school with his dad. Actually, was the guy who did all the jukebox stuff, and he came in. He'd always lay all the tunes on my dad, all the 45s. I had I'm an idiot, I mean, I had hundreds and hundreds of 45s that are. If I would have kept them in really good shape, they're probably worth a fortune. And but anyway, the fortune's in my head because I got to hang out with that music all the time. And that's what, I used to play nonstop to those songs.
When
Uh,
did you start like gigging and playing with people?
well, when I was like 12,
12.
I started playing little local things at the park and here and there. Then my dad and a couple of the other parents of some musicians we play with, they rented the Knights of Columbus Hall, which was, a hall that was being rented right across the street from my parochial, my Catholic grade school was right across the street, and they bought us blazers, and we played, and I think we charged $1 at the door, and we packed the place. We were playing like Junior Walker and the All Stars, and tunes like
So you're really like a rock drummer at that time.
Yeah. I mean, those were kind of funkier rock tunes, but Shotgun and stuff like that. Wilson Pickett tunes. And then it was, I was in bands that really played Motown music, and I used to go with my sister and dance all the time to clubs when I was, because I didn't gig that much, once in a while I had a little something, but then when I was like around 14, my sister and I would always go to these dance clubs, and just by chance, we were part of a conversation where they said the drummer had to go to the Army Reserves. And someone suggested that, who knew me, they said, well, Jamey could do the gig. And, I was like, I was in there underage anyways, a mustache just so I could hang out. And the guy, and he knew I could dance because I liked to dance, And he said, really? And a couple, like 4 people answered simultaneously, like, yeah, really. So they let me sit in on the last tune. I remember what it was. I played Getting Ready by the Temptations, and the guy said, cool. I said, I know all your tunes, man. He said, I didn't have to rehearse with me. But
That's awesome.
I had a lot to learn, though, about really keeping steady tempo, just not fatiguing, because I hadn't really, as a kid, I never really, played that much. I can remember getting blisters on my thumb, like big water blisters on my thumb that you had to play through because, I said I would do these gigs and I wasn't about to punk out.
So I don't want to date you, but this is like mid-70s, late 70s, early 80s?
No. I was born in 1952. So
this is 60s.
This is 1956 or so. 1966. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, yeah, I'm 67. I'm going to be 67 next month. So, yeah.
Okay.
So and then and then one thing led to another. I was kind of like because I guess they could get me cheap, and I was kind of the go-to sub for all the the good bands in town. There were a lot of blue-eyed soul bands that had maybe some black folks in them, but mostly they were white bands. But they were to my recollection they were pretty funky but then when I was like 15, I heard "A Love Supreme," and I kind of like everything changed then. I just decided that, because I knew something about jazz. I listened to Charlie Parker and, other kinds of things that were part of the bebop, and pre-bop. But when
Elvin Jones changed your life?
Yeah, that was it, man. I mean, it was, I don't even know why. I mean, it wasn't because I thought it was hip or whatever. It was like zombied out. I was like, I got to go.
It's funny. It's a conversation that I keep having with people about archetypes in jazz, and it seems like the Louis Armstrong day, had like the entertainer, and Charlie Parker tried to be like the jazz virtuoso, and Coltrane brought the spiritual kind of thing into it,
Yeah.
And that spoke to you on some level.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I think well. Because that was after Miles and his sextet happened, the quintet. I mean, the quintet, that famous group with Tony Williams, Ron Carter, and Herbie and Wayne. That I think that I remember at Berkeley in my freshman year, there was a gentleman there that used to be part of Count Basie's band, and he was teaching the history of jazz. And it was a big room full of people. It was like, the whole freshman class, whatever. It was like a lot of people. And he would talk about it. And, and we were all like into Tony Williams and Miles at that time because it was 1971. And, we were, it just had happened and we were really into that. And, it happened a few years earlier, but he was excluding that, in his history of jazz or whatever. And, I asked the question, I said, man, why don't you talk about that? He said, because I consider that to be an end of an era that, he just couldn't, for him, it kind of like, it took people off the dance floor. That's what he said. He said it took everybody off the dance floor because people couldn't dance to it anymore. And that left the public domain. And then rock and roll filled the void. And then it was downhill since then.
Yeah.
It was unintended consequence, I guess, in a sense, in that regard. But the music couldn't stand still, and it had to evolve. And so, but it evolved. But the listening crowd, it wasn't for the people who really were interested in listening. Seriously listening, because before it was, people would listen, but they had singers, they bring out singers in big bands, and they had all those other things. And these other bands were going for, playing for keeps with just extending as much as they possibly can. And that was the name of the game, and once Ornette Coleman and, that whole era in the 60s came out, it was a very special time, and it had a lot to do with the planets and, how Uranus and Pluto and all this stuff. People are finding out the similarity all throughout histories, whenever that configuration was happening, that, major changes happened on the planet ever since recorded history. So that was one of them, and we're in one of those right now. So hang on.
So let's talk a little bit about like your Berkeley days. So 15, you kind of get all in jazz, and then you go to Berkeley. You're in Boston in the 70s, which is like the thick of it.
Yeah, between the exit signs, I started a horn band in Cleveland that was like Buddy Miles, Electric Flag, and Blood, Sweat, and Tears, Chicago, those kind of 10-wheel drive, like those kinds of horn bands, and also Jimi Hendrix kind of things, and it was kind of an acidy kind of jazz band, and we were arguably, one of the top 3 bands in a very, very particular town in Cleveland, which had at WMMS, which was the largest FM radio station in the United States for breaking a record. And, people played 30-minute cuts of tunes on the radio, then 20-minute cuts, 10, it was all really kind of fresh and new. And a lot of music went down, and people, it was before any kind of cable. People had 3 television stations at best. And so people went out, and at that point, At that point, our band, I had roadies when I was 16 years old. I used to go to clubs. There'd be 1,000 people when my band played. It was called North River Street Rock Collection. Our band played. There'd be 1,000 people there. Just by word of mouth and telephone. We could play in a parking lot. There'd be 1,000 people.
That's fucking crazy.
So, yeah. So, and I didn't even play in band in high school because I considered it lame compared to the shit that we were playing. And I never played in orchestra or anything like that in high school. And I needed actually that kind of thing, because I just was fast enough to just hear a song and understand what was going on. And, if I needed to hear it again, I would. But, I understood, the vernacular of the day. It was my music, and, I didn't have to sit around and study it too much until I think I heard, I heard Miles with, that band. I heard Weather Report, and I think when I really heard Weather Report, and I felt that whole international sensibility, because it kind of resonated in me that, it just wasn't this, traditional jazz thing, that there was a lot more room in it. Then I heard Keith Jarrett's quartet with Charlie Hayden and Dewey Redman, and that episodic kind of playing, and then of course Ornette Coleman, and and then Coltrane's band. So, and I never really got tremendously invested in bebop, just as far as a style. Even though I played, even during my college years, I got called to play at different times with famous bebop players when I was home in Cleveland, like with Sonny Stitt and people like that. And so I had a chance to do, experience that firsthand. And but I knew that was never going to be the language that I was going to make a career in. But I just knew, as a rite of passage, I had to know as much about it as I could. And I really worked at that. I played along. And for that matter, I was in love with the Bill Evans trio, and I knew every tune that Bill Evans played. I knew all his, incarnations of the band, and that's really I played trio, and as much as I possibly could. But I also grew up with, it's funny because last night here at my house, there was a concert here in Cleveland at Oberlin, which is just west of Cleveland, Oberlin Conservatory, where I teach now. And last night we had Joe Lovano, Jack DeJohnette, Esperanza Spalding, and Leo Genovese,
Mm-hmm.
and they played here. And I part of the reason I got as well informed as a youngster as I think I did was because Joe Lovano comes from Cleveland, and I grew up with Joe. And we used to play. We went to Berkeley together, and we used to play at my dad's bar for a couple of years.
When you were like in high school or college?
After my first year of college, I
Mm.
came back home, and then Joe and I realized that Abraham Laboriel, a great bass player, I had moved to Cleveland, and we of course we were playing with a lot of people, but when we met Abe, he showed us a whole mess about what we didn't know about Central American music, Brazilian music, Afro-Caribbean music, and he was just a force of nature and the most powerful spirit we'd ever met in music that we shared intimate time with, and that brought brought us up to a whole other level of playing. But I would just as soon play free on a gig or play duets. I mean, I grew up learning how to play songs, real standard songs, just playing duets with horn players. And then you and I mean, that's the thing that, I remember how easy and joyful it was for us to play. We did it a lot. We played every week for quite a while.
Yeah, for like 2 years.
Yeah, I like playing duet. I mean, I loved it. And you were always accepting, terribly open, had all your, sonic things that you were interested in, and you didn't have any, parameters as far as stylistic concerns. And, and I had my concerns about you, just simply because you were so off into your thing, and I just didn't want you to pass by some valuable information that could go into your soup.
Yeah. You told me the funny, like, it wasn't even advice. You're just like, look at me. I remember like you're smiling, like, what are you gonna do with that? I was like, I don't know. Yeah.
Well, I mean, but that's after having some fun.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Oh no, you said it in the best way.
Yeah. I mean, just totally self-indulgent fun. And and I just wanted to make sure that, while you were involved with that whole thing, that you had a chance to be around and get some, get just some more harmonic, ideas about how you might want to look at the American Songbook. And I probably mentioned that to you.
Mm-hmm.
So listen, you could have stayed home and done all this, but you're here now. So
Right.
What do you think? You think you want to learn? So I think I suggested maybe you study with Nick Goodrick.
And you did, and I did.
Yeah. And those guys are like, they got all the whole mess of guys, Hal Crook, all those guys. Whether or not you like their message and the music, or whatever, you're gonna learn so much when you hang out with them, because they're just
sure. My problem going to Berkeley was, and I think the reason why I was gravitating towards dudes like you, was growing up in Israel, I never got to see anybody that did anything for real. It was all through records. There was no like human interaction with anybody who could actually make music come alive. And my first day at Berkeley, my first guitar lesson with a guy who shall remain nameless. They asked me like, what do you want to learn? I was like, I want to learn fusion. And then like the guy started playing for me. It's like, you need to learn this and this. And I was just like, I've never seen anything that sounded like music but had no music in it. It's like I've never been around somebody who could play but none of the shit meant anything. And I was like, the machine seemed broken. Like it's like somebody who's like making the sounds but nothing happens. And I grew up with these records that blew my mind. So I was always looking for just people who could actually play. And the shock was I thought they were all somewhere in the States growing up in Israel, and it was like such a rare thing. So by the time, I heard you play, my ex-girlfriend studied with you, and she brought home like this CD. And I remember like you were playing that drum you designed, the Hajini thing, and it's like a cello guy, and we were playing duo, and I was just listening to it at home. I was just like, yeah. And I was just like, what the fuck is this? So I just like, immediately called you and set up like a lesson, and we just play.
Yeah. I mean, that's I mean, it's a problem at any conservatory in a way. It's sometimes just, even the faculty gets, they get affected by the idea that they're reverse engineering everything all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of gets in the way of their own life's expressions. And you really have to you just have to allow yourself to experience exactly the way you want to feel, the way you want to feel it, with like-minded people, so you can develop in a healthy environment.
Sure.
It doesn't mean it doesn't mean you're going to be a professional unless you learn some other types of professional skills, like learning how to read. And, I never considered myself a professional along those lines. I was never, I had to be one enough to, not end up on the street, but I was not interested in it. When I first moved to New York, I got asked to do a show on Broadway, and I
New York for you was directly after Berkeley?
No, actually, after Berkeley, I spent some time in New York crashing with friends, and I spent another year or so in Berkeley. We had an amazing situation. I lived with it was ground zero. I mean, I lived with Joe Lovano and Billy Drews and a trombonist named Keith O'Quinn, and John Schofield was part of our scene, and he was there all the time, and Ed Schuler, and so many really, really good players. And our place was the place. I mean, teachers hung out at our house.
This is like early mid 70s.
Yeah, this is like 1971, 72, 73, 74.
And this is in Boston or in New York?
It's in Boston.
Okay.
We had a penthouse. I mean, we could get unbelievable find. I remember Billy Drews and I went to a real estate office, and said it was in the middle of a construction yard. It was an office by the entrance to the Mass Pike off of Cambridge Street. And everybody knows where that is, by the Merritt gas station or whatever.
Right.
And so we go and look at it's like a big construction yard, huge, like a warehouse with all these stalls for trucks to back in. And then there was a house. That was a house, but there was the office building connected to it. They had like 3 floors. And the first floor, the guy had his office, and then there were 2 floors above it. And the guy says, "Man, you can play up here all night. Nobody would ever hear you." It was like, what? It's like, we hardly ever play at night, but boy, it'd be great, come here, big boy. And so we got this place, and it was like, woo!
Dude.
Hold on 1 second.
Sure.
What do you want? Come here. No. Play with you now. Look at my boy. What do you want to do?
Oh, that's a good boy.
I can't play now. I know he's overdue to go out, but you just wait. Here, I'll tighten you up. Wait a minute. Hold on.
No worries. It's all good. We get dog breaks. There we go.
Cool.
So, you were in
in
Boston during that time, and you guys are having like hangs playing all night, probably having the wildest time.
No, I mean, totally wild. I mean, we played nonstop. I mean, I'd wake up, I'd start playing. I didn't get dressed. I'd be in my underwear all day. I'd start playing, I'd fall asleep in front of the drum set. Somebody else would play, get up, And we were really hanging out at the time. We would like do very cosmic things all the time, and we'd play How the Wind Blew the Curtains, and whatever.
Just trippy dudes, huh?
Huh?
Yeah, dude. So it's like, how long did the 60s last for you guys? Like, you were riding that wave?
Until last night, as far as I can tell.
That's awesome. Okay.
Yeah. Everything in life has to be like if you want to live a little longer than some of the people who checked out early, you just got to have a little bit of moderation. That's, you really do. Everything should be experienced.
Yeah. Yeah, but you guys okay, so you're doing this thing in Boston and the next step from there is New York?
No, I moved. I got hired to play with a guy who was like a Frank Sinatra kind of guy named Buddy Greco. And
Mm.
Buddy was like a child prodigy. I mean, he was already, 30 years older than me. But he was like a child prodigy. He wrote and arranged when he was 16 years old for Benny Goodman. He had perfect pitch. The guy was an amazing musician, and he sang beautifully. And he was like a headliner in Las Vegas. So I got called to play with him with a friend of mine, Frank Fabio from Pittsburgh, a guitarist who now lives in Las Vegas, still lives. And then I ended up moving to Las Vegas.
For how long?
I stayed there about a year. Maybe
How
a
was
year and
that
a half.
life? Like show
It
band
was a
life?
drag. It was an
Was
absolute
it?
drag. Yeah. I mean, I worked. I made money. I mean, the gig I had was we started playing at like I think 11. It was like 11 to 3 in the morning. That kind of
Mm.
that shift. And
Was it just a grind? Was it a drag?
no, it was a really creative band. Carmen Castaldi. I played drums and percussion, and so did Carmen Castaldi. Great drum. He just made a record with Joe Lovano on
Yeah.
ECM like this year, like a month ago,
Yeah.
like half a year ago. And then uh, Billy Tragisser, piano player, who Chick Corea used to use when he played duets.
Mm.
He was also, uh, his good buddy. No, Husky.
So it certainly doesn't sound like a drag. Why
No,
was
no,
it a drag?
no. The music thing was socially it was a drag because of how they
Oh.
treated women and the whole scene. The whole structure of everything about it was just really distasteful to me, and I didn't really like the vibe of the place. We did
Mm.
our best. As a matter of fact, I went to a club that was off the strip that was doing well. I said, "What's your worst night of the week?" I said to the guy, and the guy said, like Monday. I said, "Great. Can I have Monday nights?" I said, "I want to play jazz in here." He goes, "All right." So, but I just knew there was a million guys in town who had nowhere to really hang out, and so
Yeah.
it became a scene. It was like a real scene, and everybody that passed through would come hang out there. And and then we had a couple other nights, and I did other special events if I thought people were coming into town, and it just grew like that. And I was, and then and then while I was there, a guy I played a lot of music with, Kenny Warner, piano player, great
Hmm.
piano player, Kenny Warner.
Yeah. Most people he read his book.
Yeah, yeah. This is way before that,
Yeah.
and Kenny said, he was starting a band, and wondered if I wanted to come and play, and I was really lonely for that. I remember emotionally,
Mm.
I was just lonely for that music because no matter what it was out there, they weren't part of, they wasn't really part of my crowd's music. Everybody's got
Hmm.
their thing. So I moved to New York, and I moved in with a very famous guitar player who I grew up with. He was like my mentor in music. His name was Bill D'Arango. And in 1948, 1949, Bill played with Ben Webster and Sarah Vaughan and Bird and
Hmm.
Dizzy, and he was voted the jazz guitarist for musicians poll in the Esquire magazine and Downbeat, 1948 and 49. And he's a Cuban Jew from Cleveland who moved back to Cleveland and opened a music store. And Joe Lovano and I and this Carmen Castaldi and all the best players in town, Ernie Kribdo, these guys from Cleveland, Kenny Davis, we all hung out with him all the time.
Mm.
And he was kind of launched us in this other kind of like free-ish kind of playing. He was just so accepting, even though he was one of the originators of bebop language. He was just, to him that didn't even have a name yet. Even on records, guys with, I know Charlie Hayden loved him. I know Joe Zawinul loved him because we grew up in Cleveland playing opposite whoever came in. I played the band, and there was a band with Skip Haddon who also taught us
Hmm.
and we played opposite whoever came in, and all those guys got to hear Bill, and he played free. They played opposite, and no matter he played free, and
Yeah.
they were really awesome at it. I mean, sometimes I played with him, but he had a trio that he played with all the time. But at this point, when I moved back to New York, he was living in New York, and he said I could be his roommate. And so he had a great apartment, and besides being new to New York, I did my best to try to help Bill get reestablished back in New York. But,
and this is like late 70s now, right?
Yeah, exactly. And he wasn't, he was just a peculiar guy. He'd play his ass off. I used to wake up in the morning. He would break his metronome. So it would, then we had those kinds that you go like
click,
this, but you
click,
could actually
click.
do. No. It was another one that had like kind of an electric thing and then he figured out a way that it can go faster. And he used to play, and I come in the kitchen at like 3 a.m. He'd be there in his underwear playing Cherokee and like, like, I just used to watch. He wouldn't all be watching them. He'd be like tearing it up, man, for hours at a time. And he was really a masterful guy, totally original. And he didn't understand. He had no patience for a lot of things that we came to love. But he loved Keith Jarrett. He loved Weather Report. He just was a really accepting guy. So that helped. Kenny Warner, Joe Lovano, even Schofield. I took Schofield over there to meet him when John was in town because John knew who he was. It was important for people to meet Bill, I thought. And so that was a big part. I don't know who, Joe and I mentioned it last night. We don't know who we would have been if we never had met Bill. And
up to this point, how much road was in your life?
Well, I mean, when I was at Berkeley, Billy Pierce and I, and even Keith O'Quinn and Billy, we all went on the road with this thing called the Roy Radin Vaudeville Tour, which had people like Joanne Worley and Frank Fontaine and Red Buttons and all these older Borscht Belt kind of performers, and there was a giant audience. It's talking that's 1974 or something, and we went all over. I spent months on the road doing that. And then whenever we could cobble together a gig, we did it, for our own bands. And none of us could get arrested. No, it wasn't like the Young Lions, like, how a lot of guys got ushered in with Whit Marcellus and all that.
Sure.
Our generation kind of got passed over. There was only a few people that became famous early on. And that wasn't necessarily Joe either. It was, maybe it's John Schofield because he played with Miles.
Sure, Mike Stern.
Yeah, but he's a generation behind me. And then, but for my generation, it would have been, as time grew on, was Bill Frisell, Joe Lovano, Schofield, and maybe a few other people. But that's about all I can think about that had great careers, fairly early on in the mid-30s. And other guys came on and were like, the heir apparent, but it wasn't us. It wasn't to be us. Because, I always had in my mind, I said, well, who are we if, somehow no one could dig what we about or what we do. But you can't, you have to have durability.
Of course. And this biz for sure.
Yeah, and stay with it, another thing I probably forgot to, I admitted that early on when I was just a freshman, Gary Burton got Joe and I, because before we got to Berkeley, I played opposite everybody who passed through Cleveland. I played opposite Herbie Sixtet, Bill Evans, Keith Jarrett, Tony Williams, Lifetime, Sun Ra. Stan Getz, anybody who was touring at some point, we played opposite. So I was a freshman at Berkeley. Imagine freshmen, Joe and I.
It's not the same kind of experience.
Yeah, I'm like, these guys are trained yet. So I remember we went and saw John Laporta, who was one of the founders of the curriculum there at Berkeley. And we told him, we said, man, this is a drag, man. These cats can't play. We're in these ensembles. These guys don't even know how to count off a fucking tune. And he got it. He looked at us like, because I know he dug Joe, and because he was a saxophonist. And so he said, well, get whoever you want to lead an ensemble. We can do that. So we got a guy named Jackson Stock. Jack Stock was a great trombone player, really great arranger. And he brought in his tunes, which admittingly hard tunes.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. We're like, so finally, we're like getting some get so much. Not that we couldn't have been challenged, but we couldn't have been challenged with most of the other freshmen. They had a lot to learn, and I'm sure they did. It's just that we had a little bit of a head start.
Well, yeah, you came in playing professionally for a long time.
Yeah, and also we like funky music. We were around funky music, and if it wasn't funky, it's like, who cares,
So what did the early '80s look like for you? Where were you? What were you doing? So you just about what was the period after New York?
What happened was I came back to Cleveland after the early '80s. I came back to Cleveland because when I was living with Bill in New York, and we had a chance to buy the apartment, and Bill, didn't really have much savings, and I surely didn't. But I saw a really good opportunity to buy this apartment on Eastern Parkway across the street from the Brooklyn Museum, the Botanical Garden, and Turner Towers there. And so I went back home to Cleveland where I knew I could work. And I played, I could play here 6 nights a week, and I could play, 3 gigs a day sometimes. Mm-hmm. So I just played and saved my money. And then I went back up there and I worked on the apartment to prepare to sell it. And I bought it. I split the money with Bill because he got me in on a great deal. And Bill moved back home to Cleveland, and I moved to Brazil.
Brazil?
Yeah.
What? Why? How? What happened there?
Well, I was always in love with Brazilian music. When I was a student at Berkeley, I guess I forgot I admitted this. John Schofield, Kenny Warner, and I, Rick Kilburn, a bass player, we played in a band with Ayrton. And Claudio Roditi. There was a whole wave of Brazilians that came up to play and go to school who were professional. Something, they all came up together from Brazil, from Rio for the most part. And Zeca Assumpção, great bass player, ended up playing with Egberto Gismonti for a long time. Claudio Caribe, great drummer. All these great players. Victor Aziz, Brazil. Very famous saxophonist from.
So you guys were hooking up in Boston and New York?
Yeah, in Boston. And then Ayrton needed a band. And so Claudio Roditi said, why don't you because we were all hanging all the time. He said, why don't you get these guys? So John Schofield, Ayrton lived with us then. And we practiced, his music. And he kicked my ass. Because he grew up playing, all that music that, I didn't. I thought I knew something about it, but I didn't really. So I had to, it involved a lot of independence that, jazz players didn't do at all. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, but I was up for it. And he was cool. We just hung out. But on the gigs, he needed a lot of energy and he needed to hit that groove. And so I really went to school on him. And then, we were opening up for Cheech and Chong. Imagine that.
What?
Yeah, that was not a great scene.
Why not?
Well, they didn't. We were playing, Tamba in 7/4. Beat that going that. These are like these kids that are totally stoned out coming to see Cheech and Chong. It's like you need like chicken wire in front of the band, that kind of thing.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, it was a drag though, but nonetheless, we went out. We'd hit it as hard as we could, and then at some point, just Ayrton just couldn't do it anymore, and it was a hard time for him because Flora was, had some problem, had a run-in in California, so she would be coming out to the gigs and then had to go back, and it was kind of a rough period for him. So he just disbanded us in the middle of Pennsylvania. We had to figure out how to get home and everything. And so, but it was still an awesome experience. I was just, for that part of my life. But I was already into it. I actually had family in Brazil. When my grandmother came from Lebanon, United States, her brother, Madia, went to Brazil. So I had family there, and I had always heard about it. And plus, my mom and dad had went there to visit people. And my dad came home with all these instruments and records. And because he knew I was I would do something, I figured out how to play all this stuff, everything that he gave me, but I still had never been there, and I had a Brazilian girlfriend at the time, we had met, and so, it seemed like the right thing to do, so I did it.
So you get to Brazil, you're a musician. Where do you start? What'd you do?
Well, it turned out everybody that I went to Berkeley with had the best gigs. They were playing with Milton Nascimento and Javan and Chico Buarque and all these people, and it was like, man,
Easy to get in.
Yeah, I mean, totally. And they were, I used to go to gigs with them, and they were my good friends, and it was really a very sweet time. And and guys like Hickey Pantoja, he lives in California now, and Homero Lubamba, who lives in New York City, great Brazilian guitar player, and the Duca de Fonseca and Nilson Mata. These are all guys that I met, and Cafe, the percussionist, and I met them there. And
how long did you stick around?
A year, just almost a year, and not quite. I'm probably saw a little 7-8 months maybe. But what happened was people always wanted to play jazz with me, and I'm like, forget that, man. I want to play, because they had their own version of it. They wanted to play swing.
Right.
They had their own jazz version, but no one there actually quite knew the swing language. And after a while, I was thinking, because I had just left, the world with Keith Jarrett Quartet and Miles Quintet, and, Ornette and all this, this whole attitude about, playing really open music that's based on the funk of my life. And, I just knew I was never going to be one of, it wasn't going to be that wasn't going to be my life. So as sweet as it was, and as much as it opened up my heart, I just had to get out, jump. And so I went back and I moved, that's like 1984. And then I met my wife to be, and we moved into New York together. And then I almost forgot that I applied for a Fulbright fellowship, because when I moved back from Brazil and I came back to Cleveland, just before that, I was, when I was staying in Cleveland and working all the time, it really wasn't the ideal scene, even though I could play all the time. And Skip Haddad said, you might want to check out this guy from South India, who was the drummer in John McLaughlin's group Shakti. And I said, wow. I said, okay, so I went to take a lesson from the guy. Called him up, Ramnath Raghavan. So when I saw Raghavan, he invited me into the room. I took my shoes off, a little 8x4 room, practice room at Cleveland State, and which I didn't go to school at. He also taught at Oberlin, where I teach now, but very limited people were hip to it whatsoever. And and then he asked me to keep cycle for him, and he started unit. He started modulating 2 times. Unit. I'm like missing my hand, trying to clap. Whoa, what's this? What's this? I've been drumming my whole life. This guy just dropped me off, man, on the curb. So when the lesson was over, I said, "This is it. If I was ever directed somewhere, I'm directed to this guy." And he was probably my age then. He was an older gentleman. And I carried his drums out of the room that day, and I carried him around for the next 4 years, basically.
Wow! So this was like the pivotal point away from drum set, really, and as like a
in a sense, because then I really developed some hand technique, split finger hand technique that allowed you to play more instruments and different kinds of things. But my principal instrument was mridangam and kanjura, but mridangam with him, he did play some kanjura. And then they suggested, he and Dr. Tuttle from Cleveland State, they really wanted to get more acknowledgement for their efforts to introduce the music into the curriculum. Even though I wasn't a student, I don't think any of the students were very good. So they said, would you consider applying for a Fulbright? I didn't even know what one was. That's an American fellowship to go abroad, study abroad. And I said, yeah, sure. So I applied, and I had forgot that I'd even apply, because so much time goes by after, So when I moved into New York City with my fiance, I got it like after I'm there for like, a couple months, and she came from Interlochen Arts Academy, and from before that, North Dakota. So she's never lived in a town that had more than 1,000 people in it. There was more people in our building, and and so I got this fellowship to go to India, and we decided that I'd have to go. So I left her, and she worked at the Professional Children's School at the time, and then she became the Dean of Admissions, Mary Kay. Became Dean of Admissions at Juilliard, and now she's the Dean of Student Academic Affairs here at Oberlin.
But wait a second. So how long was the fellowship? How long were you in India?
I was in India. I was supposed to go for 10 months, and while I was there, I got invited to go play at the World's Fair in Brisbane, Australia, and there was a World Drums thing headed up by a friend of mine named John Weir, a new friend of mine who had heard me play the Hajini drum at some Percussive Arts Society convention, and then he asked, people from like 36 countries or something like that came, and only 2 people came from America. He invited me and myself and Glenn Velez.
Mm-hmm.
And so Glenn and I went to this thing. So, but when he offered me a chance to do that, I was kind of over the whole thing of thinking that I was ever going to be a classical South Indian musician or whatever. And I, so I used that opportunity to jump ship, and I went from India to Australia, and as I was heading home, and that thing was awesome, because then there was a smorgasbord of all these, great players from everywhere, and around, great drummers. I mean, I had a video camera that I had gotten, and then it was like 1986 or something. I got one of the first small video cameras that had stereo sound, and I took it with me to India to record my lessons, and or record whatever, and I had it with me, so I filmed all these people. I have all this stuff on tape, which is really great, because I have to tell you, on a worldly basis, just like we lose language, we're losing traditions.
Oh, that's going out of existence every day.
Yeah, it's just so, for me, I so much to share with people. In a way, I'm kind of glad that I'm in academia, or anywhere I could share the stuff, and teach and open the door for people to explore. The best that I can do is introduce people to some things, because I'm a fraud at any of these things in the long
But
run.
that exactly is the interesting thing, like, because you go and you study for real, so there has to be like this drive that like you're gonna really get it and be one of the dudes. But then it's like it's infinitely deep too. So it's like some of these kids, it's in their blood, they grow up with it. So for you, at what point is the realization that's like, okay, like I'm not Brazilian, okay, I'm not Indian.
Well, I mean, what the thing about it is that when something kidnaps your heart, it just kidnaps your heart. Yeah. And you're not there sitting around trying to figure out why not to be that guy. So you take the energy and you run, and you do the best you can with it. Because something in you is identifying with it. I mean, whether it's some latent DNA, cellular memory of things, or who knows what, I don't know. It's the world's way too cosmic. So I, rather than like shoot it down with some kind of parental, why would you do that kind of thing? So it's like, fuck it. Just like, let's go do it.
That's some solid advice. I love that.
Yeah. And then I tell my students, I mean, I have students I took 10 students to India last year, and I took 10 students 2 years ago. I took 10 students the year before to Brazil. And one of my students, Carson, is on his way. He got a Fulbright. He's on his way to India right now. And as soon as he graduates. And so, it's he knows. We talked about it. I said, you're going to realize whatever you need to realize about the whole experience. It's going to be awesome. And you're going to realize at the end, you're an American who knows about a lot of shit. And it's going to work. And it's going to work its way into your vocabulary and find its proper place. But the only way to understand how that swings in the way that you want to, and the intensity and the fire it has, is to get on a plane and get the hell out of here. And, even Keita Ogawa, all these guys, I would send Keita and say, man, you got to go. Just go, man. It's just like, just go.
Yeah, you got to see what it's about.
Yeah, you
whether
love
people
it.
do it for real.
You'll put it in the right perspective. There's nothing I could show you or tell you that would make you believe what you're going to experience for yourself and put it in the right place. So.
Yeah. So at what point do you transition kind of more in, get a school gig? This is like years later or what? Because right now we're in the mid
What happened
80s.
was Dean Anderson, who was in charge of the chairman of the percussion department at Berkeley for a long time, came to the PASIC in Percussive Art Society International Convention in, I don't even know when. It was probably 90. Like, and I was living in New York. And he asked me if I'd be interested. I think he came there looking for someone to start a hand drumming thing at Berkeley. And I think he asked Glenn Velez too. I think Glenn said, suggested me. I don't think Glenn didn't want to do it. He had a really good career as a
frame drummer, yeah.
Yeah. And so I was a jazz musician, really, who just jumped the fence, kind of, So I was just trying to do whatever I could do. And shortly after that, I joined. I did that, but I joined Dave Liebman's band too, a great jazz saxophonist, and he was very academically inclined as well. I mean, in a sense that he could break things down and knew how to disseminate them and talk about them. And I didn't even know how well he could do it until after a while being in the band. I was in the band for 11 years, and I saw him do a master class. He said, well, by the way, guys, when we go to Europe, we always have to do master classes because it's the only way that you could pay for the,
Right.
So I sat and watched his master class. Holy shit, man!
He knows what he's doing.
But he could break it down, So
yeah.
But it doesn't make you a better player, but he had it all. He had a lot going on.
Sure.
A lot of people that break things down that you never want to play with. You know what I mean? For in your band.
Of course.
Whoever I'm playing with is who I want to play with.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So you do this now. At what point does the Paul Simon thing come into the picture?
I'm living in New York, and my daughter's like 3 years old or 2 years old, 3 years old, and my wife and a guy I didn't know. The kids meet each other and they have a play date. I find out that Jim Corona, the father of Spencer Corona, is the guitar tech for Paul Simon. So he comes over and he's, we're hanging out, and I had made a percussion tape of just me playing everything, because I was designing instruments already and doing stuff. And so he had it, and he took it with him to SIR, where Paul was looking to put together a new band because he had just finished a play that didn't work out well for him called The Cape Man on Broadway. And he spent a lot of time and energy putting that together, and he had all these Latin musicians as part of his world there. And he said, he asked my friend, he said, you think, I like that. He heard the thing. He played him something. That's what it was. And Paul came into SIR where he was rehearsing, and Jim just put the stuff on, and Paul came in and heard it and said, wow, took his guitar out and he started playing along with one of these things. He said, I can play this tune better with that than I can with the guys I'm currently trying to maybe start a band with. So who's that? He said, well, it's my neighbor. He goes, well, wow, if you called him, you think he'd come down? He said, if I called him, do you think he'd come down? He said, I think so. So that night, Paul called me up, and I'm in my, I was in my car, I remember. And he said, hey, it's Paul Simon. I said, hey, man, what's up? At that point, I could dig the gig. Friends of mine had already done the gig. Cyril Baptista had done it. They did Rhythm of the Saints. And I knew him from that. I really loved that album. But at the same time, I was in Dave Liebman's band. I was working all the time. So I didn't want to pull any punches with him. No, I just told him straight out, about where I was at and what I was into. He said, that sounds good to me. He said, come on down, So, and I brought my Jam Man. I brought my digital looping device.
Uh-huh.
And so he said, what would you do if I played this, And I said, play it again. And so he played it again. I wanted him to, really, because it was, I wanted him to know what it was he was asking me to do really clearly, because it was a song he was working on. And so I said, great. I said, give me 2 minutes, you know. And I had my jam man. I set it up with reverb, and I had a good mic and the monitors. And so I was before he got there. So I just figured out what the form was of that particular section of the song or whatever it was. And I think it was a song called Darling Lorraine, or I'm not sure, from the You're the One record. That's what he was working on. And so I just put together this thing. I played about 4 or 5 different instruments. So I did it fast, you know, did a couple of minutes. I said, try your tune now with this. And he played. He goes, wow, yeah, that's good. He said, would we do that on a gig? I said, no. You wouldn't be happy if you did that on a gig. I'm telling you, that would be a recipe for disaster.
Right. Live looping?
What would you do? I said, I'd get the guy I play with, Steve Shahan. He lives in Paris, great percussionist. He said, that's who you play with? I said, yeah. And I think I played him something, you know, and he said, well, if you call him, do you think he'd come? I said, I know he'd come if I call him. So he said, well, call him. So I called him, and Paul flew him first class the next day, and he stayed in the band 6 years. He said, and then I got Alain Millet in the group. Everybody got themselves in the band. I just suggested them. They got themselves in because they could play great. But, you know, I vouched for them and, you know, said I like playing with them. So he came, what are you doing over there? And so Alain Millet and Jay Ashby, a trombonist, percussionist, singer, got in the band, and they all stayed in about 6 years. I'm still in the band, so
yeah. I mean, that's a whole other profile kind of gig. I mean, I guess from how was that like coming from the jazz world into like this kind of this sort of world? Was that like a huge transition for you, or?
Well, considering that I grew up playing popular music. But yeah, once I got serious into the jazz thing, there was a long stretch where I never played for large audiences ever. And I can remember I saw Sarah Vaughan as she was inducted into the Rock and Roll into the Grammys, and she sang a song. If anybody wants to see something really beautiful, you should go onto YouTube and put in Sarah Vaughan Grammys induction, and she sings a song called "So Many Stars." And that happened, and I saw it on TV, and I just was sobbing when it was over, because I thought, as a jazz musician before Paul's gig, I just thought, who's going to play songs with meaning, you know, at a certain level for, you know, where people actually know how to play their instruments, and, you know, there's like, you know, a large, you know, it brings all the worlds together for the next generation, you know. It was so powerful, a performance. And I said, boy, if I ever had a chance to do that, I would bring whatever it was I knew to the table. I wouldn't just be a kiss
clock
act.
In, right?
Yeah, you know, to be on a gig, you know, someone's going to have to deal with me and what I like, you know. But if you give me a chance, I'll do that. That was my prayer, you know. And so when Paul asked me to do it, I told him exactly that. You know, I said, you know, I don't need. You know, the reason why you don't know who I am is because I haven't been focusing on this. But if you like what you hear, it's also because, you know, you haven't heard it before. It's because I haven't invested in this world. I didn't think it was a proper vehicle for my talent. And he said, I'm into that.
Yeah.
he was cool. He never thought the quick path of success was something. Even when he took a lot of shit for going to South Africa and all, you know, it's like, you know, a guy from New York City, you know, a pop star from New York City, is going to go to South Africa during apartheid because he's following the sound of this accordion player he absolutely digs, and that's going to be like the next big thing. No fucking way. I mean, you know, he just went there because he dug it, and you know, had like fucking grenades thrown in the dressing room and shit like that. I mean, the guy, you know, he followed his heart. So, of course, you know, everybody. I mean, I know a good joke when I steal one. You know what I mean? You know, everybody. I don't care if you're Herbie, Wayne, everybody takes something from somewhere and does something with it.
Yeah.
None of those guys ever made a song like his song. You know, I'll let other people decide that, whoever steps over the line and that kind of thing. But, I know myself, it's hard to be totally original.
Oh, well, none of us live in a vacuum.
Yeah. I mean, it really is. So, there are some things that I think when he got involved with some people, he used their voices and their and their sounds as a vehicle for him, to write a tune. And I think they were, they knew it. They got compensated for it, and he gave it a treatment that they never would have in a million years.
Oh no, he brought it to the front, to the public consciousness. It's really, it's really something to be said about it.
Yeah. And then you don't survive that long, and he's made a tremendous evolution, I think, ever since I met him as a real mentor and just a good dude. And so I know that if I was ever in trouble or whatever with my family or whatever, he's always just been a gentleman, and I know all his kids. So I mean, we've all grown up together over it's a big part of my life, and he always trusts me to bring him musicians. He always did. Even his whole last record was an idea that, as in concept, I proposed to him about doing songs that he always thought should have saw a little more success that nobody knew. And perhaps, if he wanted to work on those songs with people that nobody knew as well, that'd be interesting. Who we collectively could think were awesome musicians, but nobody, actually they weren't in the popular realm. And so we got the Assad brothers. I suggested them. Renaud Garcia Fons, a bass player from.
Love that dude.
Yeah, awesome guy. Sullivan Fortner, who's a piano player that was an Oberlin student here, and a bunch of other players. And Ben Paul liked the idea, and then he embraced it, like he does and should do. He made it his own and followed his own instincts going forward from there. And it was cool. It was really great.
You and Steve Gadd, obviously you played together thousands of gigs, but did you guys have a history before that band or?
Zero. I got a phone I got a call him. My first time I ever talked to him, I heard his voice on my answering machine. He said, "Hey man, it's Steve Gadd. I'm a drummer. I'm just, Paul said we should, get together. I'm thinking, so when I talked to Paul about being in the band, he was trying different drummers and stuff. He said he thinks he's going to go with Steve. I said, awesome, man. I said, but he never works with percussionists as far as I know. I mean, he covers so many bases so well that I just didn't want to be, I thought about Steve and I, because we never played in bands with drum set players. And now when we play together, hardly ever, we both played percussion, because we always thought that the drum set ate up a lot of oxygen.
Mm-hmm.
So I just said to Paul, I said, I know he can do it. I just would like to think that he would want to make us equal players. So all the, I realize on famous tunes that he's made that they're drum set oriented, and I get that. But we're going to do on something, and you asked me and Steve Shahan to be in it. I hope we're all on the same page. I'm not getting crumbs from the drummers, lunch.
Well, you guys run into real issue of space, right? It's like if there's a space, it's how do you guys who goes for it?
Well, fortunately, Steve Gadd is just an awesome dude. So he just, I think when Paul said that was the direction, he just embraced it 100%. It was to him, he's always looking for a new challenge too, sonically and musically. He played with his hands, bundles of sticks, different kinds of implements, treatments on the drums, and rhythms that we were exploring. So the whole record was something that we did. And Paul had a couple of tunes sketched out, but once he heard how we sounded when we were together, he said, "You give me good rhythm tracks and forms, I'll write good tunes."
Yeah.
And so that's what we did. We'd go in the studio. We did this for quite a while. We'd go in the studio for a week, and we would just play morning, all day, and we work on sounds of the drums and pitches, and then forms and how forms and timings go into one another. And then Paul would spend the next 3 weeks putting a song to it. And, we did the same. Obviously, for his part was probably a little looser than a daily work, but he did. And over the few years. It took a year. I don't know how long it took, but we made that album, You're the One. And once he started singing, the percussion wasn't as predominant, although it is when you hear it. But I have the tracks before they got whacked. And,
Right.
they're fucking happening, man. They're really up front and in your face. And we were all disappointed a little bit because of, it took a little bit of a back seat, but to Paul's credit, he knows how to tell a story. He knows what he needs to get his story out there.
Sure. And what are you going to tell Paul Simon about making records?
Yeah, and that's what I said. I said to him, Tristan, what are you going to write about? He goes, I'm not worried about that. I said, there's a story every time I open my door and walk outside.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I bet. To me, my experience working with you and bringing in a record to get percussion, that's the one thing that's kind of filtering out of.
Come on, my man.
That's the one thing that's like really in danger of filtering out of records right now with synthesis and sampling. It's just this thought of color, right? And it was never really essential to jazz till maybe the 70s, but never in a real way, like other musics in other parts of the world. That idea to have some metal, some skins, it just fills up the mix and such spices.
Jazz snobbery is just pervasive. They think that they know everything about what's cosmic about music because they can play on giant steps, and they know the American songbook. And there's so much of that changed the world in real time decision making that you can never disrespect it anyway. But I've seen just egregious things happen with world musicians and jazz musicians pairing off, or jazz musicians just disrespectfully just don't do any homework to make up the difference between where they're at and these indigenous musicians who are doing what they're doing. They just they treat them like some kind of engine or whatever it is, or they never really got into the whole idea of, how their music services people and what it does for them. I mean, there's just so much that any one tradition can bring to a music. Just like, the music comes out of our churches and things like that. Well, you add, 2,000 years to Ethiopian evolution in music.
It's deep. It runs deep.
You go a lot of information going down there, man. So, and not that we would ever get it all, not that we would ever understand it all, but, that was the thing I realized that was the best thing I could do was to, go to those places. I went to Ethiopia, I hung out, and I went off the track and hung out with people. I did what they did. I ate what they did.
Well, this is something that's interesting to me because, you went and explored India, which is kind of cerebral kind of music. What was the difference, going to Africa from your perspective, musically, when you were digging into that?
There is a lot of, there's millions of forms of regional music in India.
Sure.
I was studying Carnatic, classical South Indian music. It's very formal, and it has a million do's and don'ts, and it's super, 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 heady, and but I needed discipline, so it was good for me, In Ethiopia, it's tribal, and it's music meant to prepare people for a ritual.
How hard did it hit you?
Yeah. And it's and this is music that's been developed viscerally under the stars for tens of thousands of years, and they swing so hard. They probably swing less now than they did 1,000 years ago. I mean, we did not invent swing, man. This stuff is so off the hook, ridiculous. Where it sits in the beat, and how it gets you high based on, it's just formulated to get you high. It's awesome. And so, I mean, a whole continent of Africa is filthy with it. It's really amazing, from Morocco to Algeria to Tunisia. And I spent a summer in Tunisia in 1974 as well. So I was kind of heading this way, no matter what. I was just like that. But listen, I might have to go because I got.
Yeah, sure, dude. We got a whole life to dig into here.
Yeah.
This
And
is
then
amazing.
I had a daughter, Georgia James, who's 26.
Sneak that shit in there.
She goes to Columbia. She's going to change the world, man. She's going to graduate school in Columbia. She's in New York
Don't
City
change it
right
too
now.
much. You play world music. We want to keep some of it.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Well, thank you so much for doing it, Jamey. Jamey Haddad.
Man.
Everybody go on all the websites. Check out this man. Lifetime in music. Tons of records. Tons of everything. And with Paul Simon currently.
Oh, you know what, though? You want to check out some. There's two things we should talk about.
Yeah, let's talk. Yeah.
My band, which is called Under One Sun, which has musicians, has Palestinian musicians, Palestinian, Afghani musicians, Italian, two Venezuelans, New Yorkers.
It's quite a collection.
Yeah, 8-piece group, accordion, piano, 3 percussion.
Nice.
Acoustic bass, piano, Leo Blanco. So, really great players. Billy Drews plays saxophone. Our record was all Billy's compositions. So, Under One Sun's awesome. And then this band, Snarky Puppy, formed a new group called Bocante. Michael Leake formed a new band called Bocante, and he had asked me to be a member of it. And I told him, hey, man, I'm 30 years older than the oldest cat. He said, so? I'm like, cool. I said, well, I'm in. And the band is awesome. It's great.
That's awesome.
He knows how to lead a band, and the band is funky and plays hard.
That's great.
Check out Bocante and Under One Sun, and much love.
Jamey, thank you so much, man.
All right.
See ya.